Okay, so before we start this video, there's various opinions on whether it is okay to store your coffee beans in the freezer, and for us, we think that it depends. Coffee beans absorb moisture and it also absorbs odors. So if you were to store your coffee beans improperly in the freezer, you will absorb all this moisture into your coffee beans, you absorb all the odors from the other food in your freezer into your coffee beans, and of course this will affect the taste of your coffee when you are using them. And the reason why you don't want moisture in your coffee is because it makes your coffee taste slightly rancid. You will have an unpleasant taste in your coffee. However, we think there are a couple of scenarios where it is better to freeze your coffee beans rather than keep it in ambient. Sometimes you have very nice coffee friends. They all go traveling and then they bring back coffee for you, and now you have 2-3 kg of coffee that you cannot consume within 6 weeks. So instead of keeping it in ambient temperature, we would suggest freezing your coffee beans in the freezer to preserve all the taste notes. The second scenario that we think that it makes sense for you to freeze your coffee beans is, so let's say you found a seasonal blend that you like and you would like to enjoy the coffee for a longer period of time. So in this scenario, it doesn't make sense for you to store everything in ambient because then the coffee would degas. So how do you freeze your coffee beans in the way that it does not change the tasting notes or the aromatics too much? So firstly, it is to pre-portion your coffee beans, however much you use in probably like a week or 2 weeks. So the reason why we pre-portion coffee beans and not have a situation where we are constantly opening and closing the packet from the freezer, every time you open the bag to portion out the coffee that you want. So first things first, you are introducing moisture and more humidity into the coffee beans every time you open the bag. This will of course be absorbed into the coffee beans that's remaining in the bag and you store it in the fridge. The constant changes in temperature, there will be condensation in the bag or on the coffee that will then freeze, and then you will get ice crystals in your coffee bag, which you really don't want. So once you take it out from the freezer and then you use the entire bag, and then the next time you need a new bag, you take out a new bag. When you store it in the fridge, you want to store it in an airtight, first things first, airtight container. If you are able to vacuum seal the coffee, it's even better. So you can also freeze your coffee beans in the original packaging that it came in, provided that it has not been opened and that the valve is a one-way valve. Then you can store the entire thing in the fridge. But if the packet is already open, then you want to find a different container. It would be better to separate your coffee from your food that you freeze, just to eliminate the possibility of your coffee absorbing the odors. So in conclusion, is freezing coffee a viable option? Yes, not 100% yes, but yes, it would make sense if you have too much coffee on your hands and you want to prolong the shelf life. But if it's not done well or not done properly, then you risk spoiling your coffee beans instead of preserving the coffee beans. You don't need to wait for the beans to thaw. You can brew it straight. But that is to note that first things first, because the beans are frozen, it will be harder. Running it through your grinder might, in theory, affect your bursts, as well as after you grind, your coffee grinds will be slightly cool to the touch, like you'll be cold. The temperature of your grinds might lower the temperature of your brewing temperature. If you were to freeze your coffee beans, we would recommend bringing your coffee beans back to room temperature first before you start using it. Okay, so let's get brewing. The coffee that we use today is a geisha that we roasted on 8th of May 2025, which is about just a little bit more than a year ago. And then we froze it on 26th of July. So between the roasting date and the time that we freeze, there is already time for the coffee to degas and deteriorate a little bit, and then we froze it in these single doses so that we can just take one out and experiment. Alright, so results for the brewing. We dialed in 15 grams of coffee and extracted 30 ml of espresso. The geisha tasted sweet with bright acidity. However, the floral and fruity notes is slightly muted when compared to brewing fresh. It is still an extremely enjoyable cup though, and we suspect that the loss of tasting notes is from the gap between roasting and freezing instead of storing it in the freezer. Alright, so that is it for today's video.